Welcome to the City Club Forum. The president of the City Club, Nelson Weiss, is out of town this week. I am Pitt Curtis, treasurer of the City Club. Our speaker today is Mr. W. Paul Tippett, who is the chairman of the board and the chief executive officer of the American Motors Corporation. He assumed that position on January 15th of this year. He had earlier joined American Motors Corporation as president and chief operating officer, and he was elected a member of the board of directors of that company on October 20th, 1978. Mr. Tippett is an Ohioan. He was born in Cincinnati. He was awarded a Bachelor of Arts degree from a college in Indiana, Wabash College at Crawfordsville, Indiana, in 1953. He served 4 years with the United States Navy as an intelligence officer, and then to demonstrate his great good sense, he joined the Procter & Gamble Company as a brand manager and advertising supervisor. He left P&G and started what has really been a very dynamic business career by entering the automotive industry in 1964 with Ford Motor Car Company. He held various marketing positions with Ford and the Lincoln Mercury division of the company. In 1972, he was named Vice President of Product and Marketing for Philco Ford in Philadelphia. He then moved to England in 1973 when he was appointed Director of Sales and Marketing for Ford of Europe. Mr. Tippett left Ford in 1975, became Executive Vice President of the STP Corporation, became President of STP and a member of its Board of Directors in 1976. He later moved to New York City, where he was elected Executive Vice President and a Corporate Director of the Singer Company. And he was also President of Singer's Sewing Products Group. As I noted, he then joined American Motors and has risen to his present position as the chairman and chief operating officer. With a business career like this, I'm certain we're going to enjoy what he has to say, so please welcome W. Paul Tippett to the microphone.
Thank you very much, Pitt. It's a lot of traveling, isn't it? It's always a pleasure to visit Cleveland, especially on a day like this with the snow outside and getting cold. That's Jeep weather. Appreciate your arranging it for me. It's a pleasure to be with you and the City Club particularly. I understand this club is the oldest weekly forum in the country, founded in 1912. And for you auto buffs in the audience, that happens to be the year when Ransom E. Olds sold his company to General Motors and introduced what he called then his farewell car. Just before selling out, Mr. Olds introduced the Rio, R-E-O, his initials, and he ran several newspaper ads then proclaiming that the 1912 Rio was the perfect car, could never be improved on, and nobody should bother trying. Needless to say, the rest of the industry had other ideas, and the Rio quickly faded into history. I dare say that the City Club, too, would have disappeared if its members had had the same attitude. Well, today, more than ever, change is the name of the game for any institution or business that plans to be around in 10 or 20 years. Nowhere is this more evident than in the transition now occurring in the auto industry. So this afternoon, I'd like to discuss quickly two themes with you. First, the nature of the auto industry's current transition, which is a move in the direction of internationalization as well as higher efficiency. And second, the greatest single threat to the success of that transition, namely the targeted industry philosophy followed by Japan. Just 20 years ago, many people in the U.S. auto industry suffered from an attitude of overconfidence that was unfortunately all too similar to that of Ransom Olds in 1912. We'd seen Henry Ford's dream of putting America on wheels come true. We had spearheaded the American economy into an era of unparalleled prosperity, and were on the way to putting the rest of the world on wheels. The big three car companies were the world's largest corporations, bigger than the oil companies, which now head the Fortune 500 list. The industry was turning out bigger, more luxurious models every year, and each year's sales were better than the last. Our workers enjoyed the highest wages and benefits in the world, and our stockholders received ever higher dividends. It seemed like we could do nothing wrong. But then, about 4 years ago, the unthinkable occurred, and we entered the nightmare of declining sales and earnings that lingers today. You in Cleveland, the base of so many supplier and related businesses for the automobile industry, are well aware of this tragedy. It's a scenario that would have been inconceivable 20 years ago. Just consider a few of the statistics. In 1978, the auto industry and its related suppliers accounted for 1.9 million jobs in this country. Today, about 675,000 of those jobs, a third, don't exist. Auto companies and suppliers have closed down some 450 plants in the United States. The industry is now operating at only 60% of capacity, compared to the 90% of capacity just 4 years ago. Passenger car sales last year totaled 6.2 million units, the lowest level in 20 years. What went wrong? How did the world's largest manufacturing industry fall into such a decline? Well, with hindsight, some of the factors involved should have been foreseen, but others inevitably took governments and industries by surprise. We were hit by two unprecedented economic shocks. The first, of course, was the Arab oil embargo of 1973 and the simultaneous quadrupling of oil prices. While consumers soon forgot the long gasoline lines caused by the embargo and sales of larger cars came back, the industry then saw the handwriting on the wall. All companies accelerated work on plans for new lines, smaller, lighter, and more fuel-efficient cars. These plans were just beginning to move from the drawing board to the assembly line when we suffered the even greater shock of the Iranian oil embargo in 1979. This time, American consumers moved decisively away from larger and heavier cars to smaller and more fuel-efficient models, and they've been moving in that same direction ever since. Those auto companies which didn't have a fuel-efficient product to offer when the price of crude oil doubled in 1979 saw their sales go to foreign manufacturers whose products were already designed for home market fuel prices of $2 to $3 a gallon. Along with the oil crisis in '79, we had the onset of spiraling interest rates the same year. And this, combined with the cumulative effect of inflation and the cost of meeting government regulations, created a new term in the consumer dictionary, sticker shock. And on top of sticker shock came the broad erosion of consumer confidence in the economy. All these factors led to a prolonged industry slump, which has lasted longer than anyone, I think, had anticipated. Now, this is not the first downturn the auto industry has endured, but it's one that has produced some unprecedented changes in industry attitudes and in our way of doing business. The crucial difference in this economic recession, not only for the auto industry, but for all our basic industries, has been the impact of foreign competition on our weakened industrial base. When we were caught off guard in 1979, the foreign competition was waiting in the wings, ready to take advantage of our basic industries as we were forced to retool and, in effect, rearm. How were they able to do that? Well, during the 2 decades of domestic growth and domination of world markets, U.S. industry appeared to ignore the fact that foreign companies were investing in new plants and new technologies. We rested on our laurels, increasing the volume of production, but working with an aging national industrial plant, some of which dated back to World War II. We failed to upgrade our plant, technology, and products as quickly as possible, sometimes funneling the profits that could have gone into such projects into higher wages for the workforce, higher dividends for the stockholders, and non-productive plant and product alterations dictated by the government. Equally important, I think, we minimize the possibility of other nations penetrating the U.S. market. Made in America was the standard all other countries aspired to match. Who would have dreamed that American consumers would buy automobiles or steel or machine tools made in Japan? In short, we learned the folly of Ransom Olds' 1912 boast the hard way. 20 years ago, imports accounted for just 4% of the U.S. market, automobile market. But today their share has soared to 32%. In 1981, Honda, Toyota, and Nissan had combined profits from U.S. sales of $890 million, while the U.S. auto industry posted a loss, cumulatively, of $1.3 billion. Now, the U.S. auto industry has reacted to the challenge of foreign competition by cutting costs to the bone and investing in retooling and new technology on a massive scale. In the past 4 years, the industry has made progress in design. It's made more progress in design, technology, and productivity than it did in the previous 4 decades. As a result, vehicles made in America today can match those coming from any country in the world in terms of quality, durability, and fuel efficiency. The one area where we still lag is in our manufacturing costs versus those of the Japanese. That is sometimes an area beyond our control, and I'll turn to that shortly. Now, along with this current technological revolution, we're also undergoing a more subtle but ultimately more far-reaching transition. Major growth markets of the future will be beyond our borders, just as they have been for the Japanese auto industry in the past 2 decades. Today, there are a total of 320 million motor vehicles in the world, 320 million. The Motor Vehicle Manufacturers Association projects that by the year 2000, there will be more than 600 million automobile vehicles in the world. And if that isn't a growth industry, what is? But where do we expect the growth to occur? In 1960, North America accounted for roughly 60% of all vehicle sales. But by 1980, that proportion had declined from 60 to 37%. Putting it another way, North American vehicle sales grew by 39% in that 20-year period, but European sales grew 188%, and Latin American sales grew 600%. In short, much of the growth of the U.S. auto industry will be in export markets. The successful companies will be those which think globally, are involved in global markets, global supply links, and global manufacturing plants. The 4-year-old business alliance between American Motors and Renault is an example of what I see the world car company becoming over the next 2 decades. In 1979, American Motors became the exclusive distributor of Renault passenger cars in the U.S. and Canada. We also acquired the right to manufacture Renault passenger cars in North America, and plans were established then to produce a new front-wheel drive passenger car to be built in Kenosha, Wisconsin, where one of our plants is. For American Motors, this alliance meant access to technology we could not have afforded on our own. For Renault, it meant a responsible, large-scale investment in the U.S. market. In fact, Renault invested more than $200 million in retooling at Kenosha to produce our newest car, appropriately called the Alliance. I hope you've heard about it. The Alliance went on sale about 3 months ago, and it meets or exceeds everything in its class, including Japanese models, in overall efficiency, quality, optional features, and durability. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency has rated it the most fuel-efficient, gasoline-powered car built in America, and it's a leading contender for the Car of the Year award. Now, through its relationship with American Motors, Renault has become a full participant in the U.S. market with investments in manufacturing as well as in marketing. Volkswagen has made a similar commitment. U.S. companies, including American Motors, have made the same kind of investment in Europe, Asia, Latin America, and Africa. The companies which succeed long-term in foreign markets should be the ones that make commitments to create jobs and contribute to the economic growth of the countries where they sell their products. In this era of economic interdependence, no major company should expect to participate importantly in a foreign market if its activities are limited to selling imports and taking the profits home without investing in the host country. But not everyone is willing to play by the rules of responsible, cooperative international trade. The Japanese have adopted just the opposite attitude, one of conquest rather than cooperation in entering foreign markets. This is the greatest single threat to the U.S. basic industries as they as they undergo the transition I've just described. Now, many have attributed Japan's success in the U.S. auto market, for example, to a more efficient and productive workforce, coupled with superior management techniques. The fact is that U.S. labor and management are just as dedicated and innovative as those of any country in the world. Japan's success in the U.S. market stems largely from differences in the two countries' political treatment of industrial growth and foreign trade, not differences in culture or management style. The number one difference in Japan's approach to world trade is the so-called targeted industry strategy, which has been the way of life in Japan for more than 3 decades. How does it work? Simple. Key industries with high export potential are identified by the Japanese government and then nurtured domestically in a hothouse environment till they're strong enough to compete overseas. The Japanese government prohibits foreign competition in the home market through tariffs, quotas, and restrictions on foreign investment. Companies are also encouraged by the government to set production quotas with each other, establish special supplier relationships, and fix prices. When these companies are ready to enter foreign markets, they then enjoy such advantages as accelerated depreciation and special reserves for tax purposes, exemption from antitrust laws, subsidized low-interest loans, government-funded R&D programs, and an undervalued currency. Advantages no American company can either obtain or effectively compete with. This spring, one U.S. company got totally fed up and decided to take on the Japanese single-handedly. In a 700-page petition filed with the U.S. Trade Representative, Hudai Industries Incorporated, a Florida-based manufacturer of numerically controlled machine tools, documented how the Japanese have used the unfair advantages I described to capture a major share of the U.S. market for numerically controlled machine tools. And their petition, Hudai's petition, is becoming rapidly one of the best-read publications in Washington. Let me just give you 3 of their findings, 3 findings in this 700-page document. First, they demonstrated that the Japanese Ministry of International Trade and Industry, called MITI, forced the low-volume machine tool manufacturers in Japan out of certain market segments. Their market share was then turned over to a limited number of larger producers who formed a government-sanctioned cartel free of domestic competition and able to concentrate on exports, principally to the U.S. Secondly, to support this group, in the 1950s, MITI, the Japanese ministry, granted sugar import licenses to the remaining members of the machine tool cartel. Why is that important? Well, the cartel members in the machine tool business now were allowed to buy sugar at the low world market price, then resell it in Japan at a much higher control price because sugar is prohibited normally from being imported into Japan. The profits on these transactions were used to subsidize machine tool sales at extremely low prices in export markets. Thus, these innocuous sugar licenses were used to support machine tool dumping. Thirdly, again, there are other examples, the Japanese government used money from betting on bicycle and motorcycle races, believe it or not, to subsidize the R&D for this machine tool cartel. Money collected from the betting on the bicycle and motorcycle races went to two marvelous-sounding organizations. One is called the Bicycle Rehabilitation Association and the Motorcycle Rehabilitation Association. But under Order Samiti, these two organizations sent millions of dollars into the R&D coffers of the machine tool cartel. Now, these kinds of actions have not been limited to the machine tool business. And what has been the U.S. response? For the most part, endless debate that has achieved little or nothing. During a congressional hearing a few weeks ago, Secretary of Commerce Baldridge admitted that 18 months of negotiations have failed to make a dent in Japanese trade policy. I agree with the Secretary. The Japanese have been slow walking us to death. And they won't change their trade policy unless we send them a clear and strong signal that we are serious. Now, I'm not suggesting that the U.S. should legislate hothouse protection for our industries. Instead, the Congress and the administration must make it clear to the Japanese that the days when they can get a free lunch in this country are over. Several possible vehicles to convey this message are already at our government's disposal. Among them, limited local content requirements. And the conveyance of this message should receive top priority when the new Congress convenes next January. Now, this new Congress must ask itself, how long can any of our country's basic industries, not just the auto industry, continue competing against the Japanese? The Japanese are allowed to use advantages not available in a free market. All other industrialized countries in the free world have perceived the threat of Japanese competition for what it is, a concerted attack on their basic industries. And those countries have acted accordingly. The common market members, for example, in Europe, in order to offset Japanese government subsidies, have a tariff on automobiles, more than 3 times the one we established in the U.S. Now, the Japanese have accepted these restrictions in Europe and continue to do business there. No trade war has occurred. We always have heard, I think, that if we do anything to the Japanese, there will be a massive trade war. There's no trade war in Europe, and they're doing things to level the playing field there. And I think that's all in the automotive, anyone in the automotive, steel or electronic or machine tool business should get, a level playing field that still preserves the right of choice to the American consumer. As I said earlier, in this era of economic interdependence, no major company should expect to participate importantly in a foreign market if its only strategy is to sell products and take the profits home without investing in the host country. This principle has been the spirit behind Renault's business alliance with American Motors. And no responsible company should expect a long-term presence in a foreign market if it enjoys unfair political and economic advantages that are denied the host country's own basic industries. The impact of such advantages on our basic industries is all too evident in the long unemployment lines in our cities. In sum, it's high time we woke up to the realities, the importance of international trade, and the threat of Japan's unique trade policy. To fail to think globally in our own industrial planning, or to refuse to confront the Japanese in our own market, would be just as foolish and suicidal as was Ransom Olds' boast back in 1912. We can't afford to let our basic industries die. We can't become a service-oriented only country because basic industries are the backbone of economic productivity. Without them, this country would become a second-class world citizen, both economically and politically. Now, just 3 days ago, Ohio and Michigan elected new governors. The greatest challenge facing both these administrations is to deliver a message about our basic industries to our state legislatures and to the new Congress in Washington. The current economic problems facing Michigan and Ohio, America's industrial heartland, are only a preview of what will happen to the rest of the nation if we continue to allow these basic industries to be victimized by unfair foreign competition. Again, we don't want nor do we deserve special favors, but we can't win the race against government-subsidized Japanese competitors unless the rules get changed. Dr. William Abernathy of Harvard, leading authority on world trade, predicts in his worst-case scenario for the U.S. auto industry that Japanese imports could completely displace automotive manufacturing in this country within the next 10 to 15 years. All the U.S. manufacturers would still sell here, but they'd produce the cars overseas. We can't afford to let that happen, not to our auto industry or to any of our other basic industries. Such erosion of our industrial base in this country would multiply our current economic problems and dangerously debilitate our national defense capability. It's not too late to reverse this trend. There are measures we can take to counter the threat of unfair foreign competition. But the time for just talking about this problem is long past. We have to accept the seriousness of the threat and take action now. It's nice to be with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Tippett. I'm sure you'll agree those were thoughtful and provocative remarks. Today at the City Club, we are listening to W. Paul Tippett, Chairman of American Motors. In just a moment, we'll turn to the traditional question and answer period, but first, a few announcements. By way of reminder, our membership campaign is continuing. We want you to know that City Club is completely non-exclusive. It's open to everyone who's concerned with what's going on in our world. And we want you to consider joining. These are exciting days for us at the City Club as we prepare to move into the new quarters in the Citizens Building. So stop by the membership table at the back of the room as you leave, or call the City Club at 621-0082 for further information about membership. Also, a reminder to support the weekly Forum series by sending in your tax-deductible gifts to the Forum Foundation. We need your support in this way, too. Today, as always, we have with us students who are participating in the Living Seminars program, which the City Club sponsors in cooperation with the Cleveland Public Schools and Cuyahoga Community College. With us now are students from the following high schools: Solon, Independence, Cleveland Heights, Beechwood, Berea, Jane Addams, East High School, Collinwood, and North Royalton. Will you students stand, please, so that we may welcome you? Thank you. These students will be meeting with Mr. Tippett for their own seminar right after the forum today. Next week, our speaker will be Randall Robinson, coming to us from Washington, where he is the director of Trans-Africa. That is an organization whose purpose is to introduce the views of Afro-Americans into the decision-making process on issues of foreign policy. He will speak on America's South African policy. Be sure to make your reservations early for this important address. Now for our question period. We have two microphones, one over here with Alan Davis, and the other in the center of the room with Bob Conrad. Raise your hand to be recognized. First question, please.
Mr. Tippett, you stated that a domestic content law would be helpful. Could you tell us why the General Motors Corporation opposes that domestic content law?
No, I can't. The question was, I stated that a domestic content law would be useful. Why does General Motors oppose it? My answer is I don't know. I think, to be specific, I said limited local content. The present bill the bill that was before Congress before it adjourned, in my judgment, was too severe. It was essentially 90% local content. I think that would reduce the choice of the American consumer. By limited, I mean 40 to 50% local content, where manufacturers in this country would still have an opportunity to source 50% of the product wherever they chose in order to be as competitive in their cost as possible. General Motors, I think, feels that, that their position, traditional position on totally free trade should not be changed. I think they are somewhat affected by their negotiations, perhaps, with Suzuki and Toyota at this time, but you'll have to ask Roger Smith why he's opposed to it. I personally support a limited local content proposal because I feel that's the only way, only practical way, to get the playing field level. I wish we didn't have to do that. But when you talk about undervalued yen, you talk about special subsidies for export, you talk about supplier relationships in Japan, there are no practical ways to change the laws in this country, reduce the monopoly laws, for example, no practical ways to get that done. The only way we can get the playing field level is to get them over here with us and let the best man win.
Mr. Tippett, is it possible that you and your board of directors would consider the successful example of your Japanese and German competition in greater involvement of the government and possibly labor unions in the administration and financing of your company?
Yes, I think some of the adversarial relations between management and labor and management and government are fortunately diminishing. Again, in that period I talked about, from 1960 to roughly 1978, things were going so well that I think from the labor point of view, the only question was how much of the pie are we going to get? From the government point of view was they can afford to do anything in the car business. And we, to some extent, brought that on ourselves. Now there isn't any pie to divvy up. As a matter of fact, there's only a tart. The government has finally recognized that we can't afford to do everything. And I think in this current environment, and perhaps one of the few good things that will emerge from our period of travail, is a more realistic view on everybody's part, management, labor, the government, on what needs to be done, and that we have to get our act together to confront a common enemy. And part of that, I think, is more consultation with each other and less confrontation.
Mr. Tippett, you told us that we've lost the competitive edge. And however, you didn't say anything about the fact that the majority of the technology and engineering here in the United States goes into the military sector. That's not true in Japan and in West Germany. Don't you think that has a very big effect on what you're talking about?
There's no question about that. I think there are two parts to it, though. The U.S. technology base and our technology know-how is second to none in the world, including Japan. If you don't think they think that, they wouldn't be trying to steal it. And I don't worry about our technology base. What we have to fight is government and business subsidized practices in Japan that are just impossible for us to compete with. As I say, the yen problem, the antitrust problems, and many of those other problems. Now, you make a very good point in pointing out that some of the basic research and development, not applied technology, but basic technology that's done in Japan can't afford to be done in this country. Why? We spend about 5.5%, maybe even 6%, of our gross national product on defense, including defense of Japan. They spend 0.8% of their gross national products on defense, about the same percentage as Nepal. Now, it's true. Now, what happens to the other 4 or 5%? Guess. That's where all this money comes for subsidizing exports, developing basic R&D programs, and so forth. And there are a lot of people in Washington that are madder than heck at the Japanese for either not developing their own defense capability, thereby reducing our costs, or at least paying us for some of the umbrella we provide over them in the Far East. And that's the source of a great deal of Japanese government capital, is the very small amount they spend on defense as a percent of their total gross national product. So you make a good point.
Mr. Tippett, you mentioned that the imported cars are capturing a 32% or so market share. I take it you mean by that that both the consumer cars and the commercial vehicles are included in the 100%, that they take 32% of.
No, I'm just speaking of passenger cars, not trucks or commercial vehicles.
How about consumer versus commercial passenger cars? Are you including both of those in the figure?
By commercial, you mean fleets?
Yes.
No, I'm including principally consumer there.
All right, thank you.
When I say 32%, about 25%, 23 to 25 is the Japanese. No one's complaining about the Volvos or the Fiats or the British Leylands or because those people come in and they operate as independent companies in this country. They don't collude with the government to do the kinds of things I discussed. My only problem is with Japan. It's not with imports, and it is not with giving the consumer in this country the widest possible choice. We shouldn't have to erect tariff barriers or quotas against Japanese cars because that restricts people's choice of product, or Japanese anything for that matter. But we've got to find a way, it seems to me, to remove this predatory attitude that says we're going to go after your basic industries like automobiles or steel or machine tools because we're going to run you out of business, and we're going to do it with techniques that you can't compete with. It's not that they're working any harder or smarter or that singing the company anthem helps a lot. When you've got a yen that's at 275 to the dollar when it should be 190 to the dollar, that's something that all the quality of work-life circles in the world won't overcome in terms of a 40% pricing advantage they have in foreign markets and in this market at times. We're currently pricely, for example, our new Renault Alliance is priced competitively with Japanese products, but they're making a lot more on theirs for basic R&D and that sort of thing because of this weak yen, which no one understands except the Japanese.
Mr. Tippett, expanding on what you just said, in 1971, President Nixon devalued the dollar in one fell swoop, 10 or 15%.
Yes, sir.
Why couldn't this approach be used now rather than import restrictions on Japanese cars, which never meet popularity?
Of course, that was devalued unilaterally at that time, and there are many people who feel that returning to a fixed exchange rate system would be advantageous. There are several other proposals to achieve that. For example, some people have proposed, I think they call it a currency equalization tax, which says if you're selling products at 275 to the dollar, when the exchange rate under what would be called a quasi-fixed system would be 190 or 200, we're going to tax the imports at a certain rate to offset that advantage. That's might be one practical way to do it. But there are a lot of people who are looking, again, I think, at fixed exchange rate rather than the floating rate, which permits them to do things. You see, it's very difficult to understand. The Japanese economy has been inflating at a 4 to 5% annual rate, not 12 to 15 like ours are. Ours has been. Their inflation rate is less. Their prime interest rates are less over there. Under all those circumstances, you would expect the yen to strengthen versus the dollar over the past 2 or 3 years. In fact, it's weakened and dramatically. And of course, a weak yen suits Japan just fine. It makes imports into Japan very expensive, so it discourages imports and encourages exports, which is their national strategy. So when the yen moves in a way that defies at least classical economic theory, but it benefits their trading position worldwide, you begin to wonder if it's just an accident. Yes, sir.
Mr. Tippett, you stated that West Germany raised the tariff on Japanese automobiles and indicating or...
I didn't say they raised it. They had the same as the other common market members, 10.8%.
The West German automobile industry is still crying that the figures show the Japanese, despite of the tariff, is still dominant in West Germany as far as sales are concerned. Do you have any figures on that?
Yeah, well, the Japanese, yes, I have some figures. As I mentioned, the tariff on automobiles in the common market is 10.8%. That's about 3 times what we charge. The German automobile manufacturers, Volkswagen, Daimler-Benz, BMW, and so forth, did not consider the Japanese to be a problem 2 or 3 or 4 years ago, because the Japanese had really not targeted on Germany. The Japanese now have about, I think it's 12% of the German market, and there's lots of concern about it. And the fact of the matter is that a 10% tariff is not consequential enough to offset the other advantages I described. And that's why the Japanese are penetrating the German market. Very low prices, which they can afford to do by subsidizing the exports at home and by having, again, a weak yen versus the Deutschmark. That's why, in my judgment, and again, we arrive at this conclusion extremely reluctantly, the only way to avoid those advantages is to say, you build some of your products in this country. And then the yen and the D-mark have no effect. The labor rates have no effect. Everybody's on the same playing field, and then let the best man win, as I say, or best person win, excuse me. I get into a peck of trouble doing that very long. And of course, in markets the size of Germany or the U.S., you see, Nissan, for example, has got a plant in Mexico. The total size of the Mexican car market is 350,000 units a year, and it's 9 million a year, 9 million in the U.S. If they can afford to build a plant in Mexico, why can't they afford to build a plant in the United States? It just doesn't make any sense. They can afford to, they just don't want to. And I wouldn't either if I was in their shoes with all the advantages back in Japan. Yes, sir.
To change the subject a little bit, Mr. Tippett, Chrysler's going out in strike in Canada tonight. And Chrysler officials said that if they do go on strike, they're going to break the company. Would that help you to pick up the pieces in this country?
Well, first, my friend and former boss, Mr. Iacocca, is a man given to drama. I don't know whether a weak strike in Canada will break Chrysler Corporation. I'd be very surprised if it did. I would not like to see the Chrysler Corporation go out of business. They're a fine company, make good products, not as good as ours, but good products. And we want them to have their share of the market. But seriously, I think it is a problem in Canada. The Canadian workers, not just for Chrysler, but for General Motors and American Motors, we have a plant in Canada, and Ford, are substantially more militant. I don't understand why. We've talked to them at length. An extended strike, I think, by Chrysler Canada, based on what I know about their sourcing patterns, what they supply to Chrysler U.S., could be a problem for Chrysler in the U.S. after some time. How long that is, I don't know. I hope that, like the NFL players' strike, some reason will prevail soon, so we can all start talking about something else. But I don't think they'll go broke anytime soon.
I have a two-part question. After a great deal of effort on the part of the state of Ohio, about last week, Honda started producing cars in Marysville, Ohio. Is that an equal playing field? And the second question is, exactly what message would you have the governors of Michigan and Ohio send to the state legislature in contrast to the Congress?
Well, first, yes, I think it is a playing field, and I applaud Honda for doing that. They're building four-door Honda Accords in Marysville. I don't know how many they're going to build. Honda sells in this country about close to 400,000 units a year. The Marysville plant, I understand, is facilitized for about 100,000 a year. So they're going to build, they can build, max about 25%. That is not as much as I think they should, but it's certainly a start in the right direction. I must say that Honda, in my judgment, is by far the most progressive of the Japanese automobile companies in that connection. Not just the Marysville plant, but they recognize their worldwide responsibilities. I think the message the governors can send the state legislature and their associates in their political parties in Washington is what I described, is that the Japanese will not do anything voluntarily that will weaken their competitive position. So the only way to do it is to apply the pressure. Our Trade Representative Bill Brock, has been trying to negotiate with the Japanese. We appear to be close as a country to solving the problem of excessive inspection in Japan of aluminum baseball bats. Now, I would like him to work personally on more substantive matters than aluminum baseball bats. I mean, we almost have an agreement on that with the Japanese. And I think we've got to put the pressure on them. They won't do anything. I wouldn't if I was in their shoes. I'd just slow walk you to death, and that's what they've been doing for 10 years. Except for Honda and the Nissan plant in Tennessee to build light trucks. See, there's an example. Nissan built a light truck plant in Tennessee. Why? Not because they wanted to, because on light trucks imported from the Far East, there's a 25% duty. 25%, not 10% as in Germany. They said for 25%, we'll build a plant. Now, I'd rather have them build a plant here and let us compete with them head to head than levy a 25% duty. I don't think that's right. I am a free trader. But let them come here and compete with us on our home territory, and then if they win, fine. But they built the plant because there was a 25% tariff, not because they wanted to. And of course, the U.S. manufacturers are now building light trucks in this country, so they've got a full-scale war on their hands in a competitive sense. Yes, sir.
This business of negotiating with the Japanese, I presume the Japanese did not negotiate with us when it came time to keeping our stuff out of Japan. Why are we negotiating with them to do the turnabout?
Well, that's a very good question. You see, it's a very complex matter, of course, but let's just suppose the Japanese opened up their borders totally to us now. Said, take me, I'm yours. With the yen, that's 270 to the dollar, would be very difficult for any American company, especially in, let's say, the automobile business or even steel and machine tools, to export profitably to Japan now from this country, because the dollar-yen disparity is much too great. So they have a built-in import restriction the way the yen has been behaving for the past 2 or 3 years. The other sanctions or problems they have on agricultural areas, principally, beef. Beef costs $14 a pound over there, and you can ship beef from Colorado, prime beef, and get it there for $4 a pound. But they've got a farm lobby just like we have, and so that's a problem for them. So it's like unfortunately, like any other government or group of people, they respond to the strongest pressure. And if we're not putting the pressure on, the Japanese government will listen to the Japanese agricultural lobby instead of the U.S. ambassador, and or the Japanese automobile lobby or steel lobby or machine tool lobby. So I think unless we start screaming and threatening to do some things that are severe, nothing's going to happen. Either in opening Japan to our products, as in the case of agricultural goods, or in let's say, leveling the playing field in this country, as in the case of steel and tools and so forth. Yes, sir.
Mr. Tippett, this is a question from what I would call an angry American. I'm angry because in Cleveland right now, one of our major corporations, Republic Steel, is going to lay off more people. 40,000 people from greater Cleveland are going to lose or will never get their jobs back because of foreign imports. I think that, and I'd like to make the other comment here, I think what the French are doing, and we've now had 200 years of good relationships with the French, where they come in here and build a car in America, and we can buy it as an American car. What really bothers me, however, is the corporations allow their employees to buy foreign cars and park in their parking lots and go ahead and see the same company have a lot of layoffs. What I'd like to know, and I think that all of us ought to start really thinking about this, is what are the big corporations doing to make sure their employees buy American?
Well, the first thing we can do, of course, is build attractive products, and that's what we're trying to do. And I think that's the biggest challenge. I think we ought to have a fully competitive product. In my judgment, we do now. Secondly, I think we have to make it attractive for our employees to buy our products. To make it a condition of employment is something I don't think we want to do. I think that's not appropriate as much as it irritates me. I mean, and I walk through our parking lot and see foreign cars, and it raises my blood pressure 2 notches above what it already is. And but I think that, as I say, making it a condition of employment, or otherwise putting excessive pressures on employees is not the way to get it done. I think if we develop the kind of relationship with our employees we should develop, and communicate with them the way I believe we can, and build good products over time, they will buy our products. And I think that's the way to approach it, frankly. Yes, sir.
Beyond the Japanese import problem, what do you consider to be the number 2 problem AMC faces long term?
Well, I don't know about long term, but short term is the economy. We are, I think, the days of sticker shock, some of my dealer friends can comment on this perhaps, are not, if not over. The sticker shock phenomenon is ameliorating. I think people now understand that cars cost more than they did in 1960, that we've got a lot of stuff on them. They are fuel efficient and so forth. So I think sticker shock is not quite the problem. I just think it's concern about our economic future. And as the economy starts to improve, which I believe it will over the next several months, people will have more confidence about their economic future and will start to buy automobiles again. The average age of the automobile on the road now is about 7 years. It's 2 years older than it was 4 years ago. So the pent-up demand, which everyone in Detroit loves to talk about, it's kind of like the oasis over there. The pent-up demand is there. People are driving older and older cars. They get more and more problems. They want to buy a new car, but only if they're sure they're going to keep their job. When that confidence returns about their employment, they don't see their neighbor laid off, as in the Republic Steel example, then they'll be coming back in droves, in my opinion. So the biggest thing we can all do, and the government can do, which of course they're trying to do, is to get the economy back on the tracks. And I think what has happened, the reduction in inflation, the reduction in interest rates, improvement of the stock market, and the final thing that happens in the classic economic cycle, of course, is for the businessmen to then have enough confidence to start expanding, building inventory, employing more people, putting on more jobs. I think that's the next phase of the cycle. I believe it will happen if we don't have some sort of catastrophe. When that happens, that'll be the best thing that can happen to us, at least in our industry, because we're so sensitive to the economic conditions of the country.
Mr. Tippett, my question is in response to your comment that you thought over the next several decades that the automobile market worldwide will be growing faster than in this country. So my question is, within the next 25 years, do you anticipate any sizable market for automobiles in the People's Republic of China or in India? And if your answer is yes, what role will the American automobile companies play in furnishing that demand?
Well, if you've been to China, you'll see that there are, what a market for automobiles. That's the other thing we smile about at night in our dreams. 1 billion people and 1 billion bicycles, but no cars. We, American Motors, are currently negotiating with China to develop a joint venture to build Jeeps. That's, with the roads in that country and the distances and so forth, a Jeep is a perfect vehicle for that country as the next step, perhaps. And yes, I think that will happen. But if the speed with which our negotiations are proceeding is any indication of the speed with which the car market in that country will develop, you and I will be long gone before we see anything happen, because they are very deliberate folks over there. But yes, of course. When you got 1 billion people, that's going to be a heck of a car market one day. In a country that size, of course, it was so spread out. In India, the same problem. As a matter of fact, the car industry in India is picking up. It's about, a couple 100,000, 300,000 maybe there now. But of course, as that country develops, which it will, economically, that's really the spark that will set that market off. It's a closed market. You must build the car in India before it to be sold in India. And most of the companies there now are Indian companies. The cars are not what you would want to buy, but they're adequate. And of course, whenever you have that kind of population size in both those countries, like between the two of them, what is it, 1,800,000,000 people? That's going to be a future market when they develop economically.
Mr. Tippett, it's my understanding from some things I read that under GATT regulations, the differences in the treatment of taxes such as direct sales tax and value-added tax could make the relative cost differential on roughly comparable cars up to $1,200 to $1,500, which is roughly the figures we hear discussed as the difference in the labor cost between U.S. and Japan. I wonder if you could, number one, talk about the accuracy of that figure? And number two, what are our delegates or negotiators to GATT taking as their approach to that difference?
Well, first, it is accurate. There's about, depending on how you calculate it, difference in taxes and that sort of thing, between, let's say, $1,200 to $1,500 between a U.S. car sold in Japan and a Japanese car sold in the U.S., to take that example. There's also another $1,500 difference in where at least I and many other people believe the yen should be versus the dollar and where it is. So that gives them a big advantage going in. Now, we would have to negotiate those differences away in some form. And such a negotiation would probably involve some sort of violation of the current GATT, General Agreements on Tariff and Trade, rules, okay? But the fact that France allows only 3% of the cars sold in Japan to be Japanese violates the GATT agreement, and both Japan and France are signatories. The fact that Great Britain allows only 10% in, the fact that Italy allows as many Japanese cars in Italy as Italian cars going into Japan, that's their kind of form of control, which essentially limits it to about 12 cars. Those are all violations of GATT. But when but Japan doesn't throw its hands up and say, that's a violation of GATT, I'm going to refuse to sell cars in France or Italy or the UK. And so we say, come on, we're the only patsy in the game. We're a big patsy. So we ought to negotiate. It may be a violation of GATT or it may require some revisions to the GATT treaty that permits us to enjoy the same competitive advantage as everybody else in the world. So I think we must go at that. The government knows what needs to be done. They understand there are plenty of options available to them. They just don't have a sense of urgency. Now, Secretary Brock, I think, does have a sense of urgency substantially greater than some of his predecessors. But we've just got to keep the heat on, that's all.
To the extent that American manufacturers are building plants in Mexico for parts to be used in cars here, how does that affect your comments as far as American jobs being created in the future?
I'm sorry, sir, we are out of time. Thank you, Mr. Tippett, for a most provocative and informative discussion. City Club Forum is adjourned.